And any federal income taxes. I am Trish Regan. Welcome, everyone, to the Intelligence Report. You just heard a very fiery speech there from Hillary Clinton, going after big bad business, going after people who don't pay their taxes, a.k.a. Donald Trump. She didn't say a.k.a. She was quite explicit in her criticism there of Donald Trump. Joining me right now with reaction to all of it, former Bernie supporter turned Trump fan Harlan Hill, plus Fox News contributor Leslie Marshall, and conservative radio host Howie Carr. I start with you, Howie. I mean, I heard a lot of anti-business rhetoric in there. However, I also heard a real appeal towards the sort of populist sentiment that frankly has gripped the country right now, in that it is the middle class and the underclass against the rich. Your thoughts on the speech? Well,
Trish, it was rather amusing. I mean, she railed against Wells Fargo. The biggest individual shareholder, of course, is Warren Buffett, one of her biggest supporters. She railed against for-profit colleges. Her husband, Bill Clinton, made $15.5 million from Laureate College as the so-called honorary chancellor. She said again she opposed TPP. You know, and as we all know, that's she is definitely a late convert to that cause after she did some focus groups and some polling. I mean, the hypocrisy here was fairly breathtaking, I thought.
Yeah, you know, at the same time, I mean, to her credit, Leslie Marshall, she said, look, you know, if you're willing to work, if you're willing to work, and I think that actually is that's something. Hillary Clinton's given up some ground there in that she said, if you're willing to work, you should be able to get a job. You know, it does seem as though this is, bottom line, the most important thing for Americans around the country right now, the economy, the economy, the economy. And they want to know that if they're going to put the hours in, they have a shot at getting somewhere. Essentially, you know, at its core, isn't this exactly, though they have different ways of going about it, exactly what Hillary and Trump are both campaigning on?
Well, it's similar. I mean, the differences are, and quite frankly, I was surprised she didn't point it out in the first debate. When you talk about the economy, and even Donald Trump himself said, one of the problems is the outsourcing jobs to China and Mexico, which he and his corporations have done time and time again. That is a clear problem, especially for the middle class, especially for both union and non-union workers in places like the state of Ohio, and specifically in areas of that state. So one, you got to bring the jobs back. I think she ticked every box that middle-class, hardworking Americans look to, which is, like you said, Trish, we are working hard. We're not asking for a handout. We're simply asking for good-paying jobs that we can support our families on. And that is a message that I think is going to resonate. I think she might get a little bounce from this in Ohio.
She was going after Trump pretty hard, you know, over and over again throughout this speech. She took some shots at him. Let's hear one of those examples right now.
Now, while millions of American families, including mine and yours, were working hard, paying our fair share, it seems he was contributing nothing to our nation. Imagine that. Not fair, nothing for Pell Grants to help kids go to college, nothing for veterans, nothing for our military.
In other words, Harlan Hill, she's going to hold him up and say, look, this is a guy that is exactly part of the problem. He was able to game the system to his advantage and thus contributed nothing to America. How will he respond?
Well, frankly, I think that this was pretty anti-business. I mean, anybody that's ever run a small business before, which I have, knows that if you take a loss, you're able to deduct that from future earnings. And so for her to hit him on that is so intellectually dishonest, and the media is partaking in it too.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, we know
the media doesn't like him, but you know, understanding tax returns is also pretty complicated stuff.
Right. I mean, look, it's a cheap shot, right? Most people hear that and they're like, oh, this guy is, you know, he's stepping out on his duty to help pay for all of the Pell Grants and infrastructure and all of these things. And really, it couldn't be any further from the truth. When he makes money, he pays on that income. It's pretty standard.
You know, to continue on that sort of tax vein, Howie, you know, she took a shot at anybody who's not paying their fair share. She would say Donald Trump's not, and also said she's going to enact something called the Buffett rule. Warren Buffett's not going to wind up paying less in the way of taxes than his secretary, of course. You know, it's all very easy to say this on the surface, because the reality is you're talking about income versus investment, complicated stuff that, you know, hey, why bother getting bogged down in those details? But Warren Buffett, as one of her supporters, maybe he should just be willing to fork over a little bit more money to the American system and do his duty.
Well, sure. And again, I get back to the fact that he's the major stockholder in Wells Fargo. I mean, the whole speech was intellectually dishonest. Look, she took.
But isn't that just politics, Howie, too, to a certain extent? It's who can be better at this game now, who can sell it in a way that resonates more in the hearts and minds of American people.
But, you know, the New York Times took a tax write-off last year. The Clintons took tax write-offs. They used to take tax write-offs when he was governor of Arkansas for his used underwear. You know, the real scandal here is the illegal leaking of Trump's tax records. And we're never going to know who did it, but we do know we have a lawless Internal Revenue Service, Lois Lerner, the Tea Party, John Koskanen.
Yeah, all right. Well, you know what? And there's plenty of time for that at some point. But we're 5 weeks away from an election, and whether you like it or not, it's out there now. The question is how much it's really going to hurt him. And I think Harlan and Howie, you're both making very good points. Leslie, as an advocate for Hillary Clinton, I know you're going to refute this, but to a certain extent, doesn't it take one to know one? In other words, if Donald Trump knows how to get around the system with his hordes of accountants, shouldn't he be better equipped to be able to make sure that no one in the future is able to get around the system?
Well, yes and no. I mean, if you look at the Clintons, who have amassed, certainly between the two of them, a great fortune, there's a difference between using the loopholes to your benefit to reduce the amount of tax you pay and paying zero. Certainly people, you know, might say, well, if you're such a good businessman, then how did you, in a sense, lose all that money to be able to make such deductions to get to that point, to pay zero taxes? Well, and like you said, Trish, that's very complicated. But honestly, I've always thought, and I have liberals who disagree with me on this vehemently, I really don't think at the end of the day that people who are undecided are going to vote for Hillary or against Donald based on this revelation necessarily, and his supporters. I don't think this is going to change their minds.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, only because I think a lot of people that are being fully intellectually honest with themselves will say, okay, well, you know, he was running a business, and granted, it was a big business and it was a big write-off, but, you know, that is the way the tax code now stands, and he did something that was fully legal. So she's going to have to get him on something else, and, well, you know, there's plenty of stuff out there. So we'll see. Harlan, Howie.